Hello, and welcome to the Fearless Storyteller podcast. I'm your host, Ethan Freckleton. Have you ever noticed how fear stops us from creating and sharing our best work? Join the Fearless Storyteller as we explore the heart and soul of writing stories, songs, and scripts that sell with the people who write them. Each guest has their own unique hero's journey and insights into the intersections between limiting beliefs and success.
But not at all afraid to say, you know what, I get to you when I get to you. Or,
yeah,
I don't want to talk. Like, how cool.
That blew my mind. And yeah. I was wondering about that, and like if it's a learned behavior or something you have to be born with. Because I have real problems.
Yeah.
You know, saying exactly what I want and telling people exactly what I think. You know what I mean? I'm very.
I do. I definitely have some of that in my journey. And I don't know how old you are, but, you know, hitting into my mid 40s, you know, I've had some chance to practice.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of those, well, they say that, right? Like, as you get older, you don't care as much what people think, and it's almost one of the nice things about getting old is that you can, I'm 36, so I guess I'm transitioning into that.
You're transitioning.
Yeah.
It's perfect time to be a parent.
Yeah, exactly.
What? You want your diaper changed? You know what? You're not going to die. Sorry.
Yeah, you'll be fine.
I don't want to talk about it. Yeah.
They make them real absorbent these days, you know. You don't have to change them every time.
Flotation devices, it's good.
Yeah.
Sure.
It is. The technology on those diapers is amazing. Like, just even I mean, I just imagine like at Procter & Gamble or whatever, they've just got teams of scientists who like figured out how those flaps can stick but aren't tape, you know?
Yeah.
And like, why isn't all things like that? I mean, it's amazing how well, even if you have to re-flap them, they still work.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is like space technology.
It is, yeah.
But it's like, I've only seen it in diapers.
Yeah. It's like the International Space Station could be built with diapers.
Yeah, totally. I bet most diaper technologies come from, like, you know how like they invented spam for space? It's probably like diapers a lot of advancement in diaper technology comes from space travel.
That's actually going to be the first Mars colony. It's going to be Procter & Gamble.
Right. It's going to be Huggyville.
Well, cool. I should probably introduce you. Well, Andrew Sleighter, welcome to the Fearless Storyteller.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, you know, this is one of my canned questions here. I this is where I say, you know, for people who don't know who you are, what would you like to share about yourself?
Well, I'm a stand-up comedian, new father, husband, living in Portland, Oregon. I've been doing comedy, you know, basically my whole adult life since college, and had a million other little odd jobs to support that until about 15 years ago when I was able to kind of be a full-time comic. And been doing that ever since until this pandemic hit. And I experimented with the odd jobs again to get by. But then, you know, like the things I've kind of found a settling point now between virtual stuff and everything. So,
yeah, well, I'm glad you can give voice to, you know, I think it could be uncomfortable for creatives, you know, when we talk about being full-time creatives and, you know, and can be awkward to talk about the jobs we do to get by.
Yeah.
As if there's some stigma to that.
There is a stigma to it, and I think that there's a weird pride in never having to have done some sort of day job, quote unquote. And you know, a lot of the people you see bragging about such things have some other stream of revenue, let's say, whether it's family or spouse or, you know, they won the lottery or something, you know. So there's always some reason why. I mean, I found that in my career, it seems like every 4 years so far, there's been some sort of panic that hits me. And like, looking back, I probably could have gotten by without driving Lyft for those 2 months, or working at Best Buy for those 6 weeks or whatever it was, or this last time I did landscaping.
Okay.
Which I was just looking for something it was either that or work at Amazon, and I was like, working for the toothless guy who's all off the books and pays in cash was much more appealing to me, and working outside, with the pandemic and everything.
You're going to get the tip.
Yeah, exactly. If there is a tip, then at least I'll get it. There wasn't always a tip. Let me put it that way. But then I showed up. I'll tell a quick story. But I go first time going to this guy. Joe is his name. I won't say the name of the company because I already said it was all off the books. But I show up, and I used to work construction in college, and I'd done a lot of like outdoorsy type projects, but never been like a professional landscaper before. So I kind of, when I called about the job, I sort of massaged that part of my history or whatever. And I show up, and he's like, "Hey, they were going to be doing laying down sod, for a new lawn."
Yeah.
And they're like, "Have you ever done that before?" And I didn't just want to just say like flat no. So I was like, oh yeah, a long time ago, but definitely would need some refreshing. So don't send me out. Kind of like saying, don't send me out by myself to go do this, please.
Yeah.
And he goes, oh good, you'll be our expert. They had never done it.
Experience than we do.
So now I was telling them. So then I'm looking at YouTube videos, you know what I mean? So I can tell them how to lay down sod.
Well, isn't that funny? Like, YouTube's legit. Like, made a lot of careers. Yeah.
You don't need to go to school anymore. You would never have to learn anything. You can learn as long as it's. I remember there's an old joke about like third grade math teachers. You just have to stay one day ahead on the lesson plan than the kids. All you have to know is but it's the same thing with YouTube. Like, you could get a job doing anything, and as long as you have as long as you're pretty smart, you can just watch a YouTube video of what you need to do that day, and you can probably figure it out.
That's definitely true in the day job.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the little secret. Like, and I pity anybody who hasn't worked a day job, because I feel like, those are the people who can't understand why government doesn't always work.
Yeah.
Or mystified by decision-making processes. You have to get in the belly of the beast and feel the pain to understand, I think.
Well, it's true. So and there's different types of day jobs, but I think what you're talking about is it's good to have some experience in the multi-level bureaucracy of a corporation.
Well said.
Because then you really feel how conflicting the different orders can be, and someone can have a bright idea 6 floors up above, and then by the time it gets filtered down to the floor where they never have to check to see if it actually works or not, but you're doing it, or if you're like, screw it, that doesn't work, I'm going to do it the way it's been doing, then you get in trouble, So you're right. I've had a few jobs. Like I said, I worked at Best Buy for a very brief period, and I worked in radio right out of college.
There it is.
And that was very much like that, because the radio station was
talking about on Instagram about that neighborhood.
Yeah, Cairo Radio. That's right.
Yeah.
And it's like a news radio station in Seattle, and they would constantly be. I feel like I only worked there like a year and a half, 2 years, but we were probably bought and sold like twice in that time, that's like the radio business.
Yeah.
And so, of course, someone buys the station, new manager rolls in, wants to do everything different, and then happens for like 3 weeks, and then things slowly go back to the way everyone was doing it before,
Yep. That's exactly it right there. So you got to have the experience, which probably makes you more relatable to people when you're doing comedy bits.
Yeah, I think so. And it's some sort of thing to draw off of. It's hard to do comedy if you're only ever doing comedy. You know what I mean? Like, if your whole day is writing and booking yourself and thinking about comedy, and then you go up at night and do comedy, and then you go to bed and you get up in the morning and you think, if you're never, the well kind of runs out of stimulus of ideas and stuff.
Yeah. Well, tell me more about that. Like, have you ever been in that groove where you're just kind of so focused on it that maybe you're
Yes.
running dry?
Yeah, so for sure. And I think of the time I lived in Los Angeles for 10 years.
Mm.
And for long stretches when I was living there, I would get focused, not just on stand-up, but like there's sort of this overstimulation of everything you should be pursuing. Not only should you be doing comedy, you should be acting and making a web series and making a podcast. And, if you're not doing all this different, so you're kind of getting pulled in all these directions, and that's all I was really thinking about. And then you realize, you're like, oh, I haven't written a new joke in like 3 weeks,
Yeah.
And maybe that's because I'm not thinking about relationships. I'm not thinking about life. And there's sort of this romanticized idea of like the comic who's like doing 6 sets a night and lives, breathes, eats, sleeps comedy, and they're the great ones. And I was like, I don't know. I mean, you do need room to have experiences, to have something to talk about.
Yeah.
Or have something inform your perspective.
Yeah, and you may not have a fully formed perspective right away on it either. You may need to process. And of course, maybe you process by writing.
Yeah, I think so. And by doing it on stage, I think I guess by the time it gets on stage, it's more, especially for comedians, it's less about processing how you feel about the idea than it is what's getting the laugh. You know what I mean? That's more of because I always think with comedy, there's the art and the craft, and what you're talking about, I think like the, processing how you really want to approach this and your perspective, that's kind of the art. The craft comes down to like, okay, that's all great, but I literally need people to laugh like every, 30 or 40 seconds, or else this is going to be very awkward. So that's like the craft part, and trying to figure out where those spots are and make punchlines and
Yeah, and I imagine there's a lot to the craft because for something to be funny, it has to be relatable in the first place.
Yeah, and
Otherwise, people don't know what you're talking about.
And there's only one way to know if it's relatable or not, and that's to try it. There's no substitute for that. There's no no matter how many times you go around to your friends and try it or whatever, or write it, and you can craft it. I talk to comics sometimes who are aspiring and they're working up the nerve to go on stage or whatever, and they always think there's this misnomer that the more time I spend before I go up my first time on writing, the better my first time will be. And that's just not true. There's no relation to that. The best thing you can do is go up on stage and just get that over with. Go up that first time, because you're not going to write your way into having a great first time. You know what I mean? Yeah. You could have 10 lifetimes to write out that first set, but it's doing the set itself that will inform you how to do the next one better and the next one better and the next one better.
Yeah, I imagine there's probably this adaptation process, just being on stage and having that view and being able to come within yourself enough to have some command of what you're doing at all. Yeah.
Totally. Forget, you're exactly right. Forget the jokes themselves. I mean, just the comfortability, because I think of it this way, I'm not great at parties. Yeah, I mean, you just end the sentence there. I'm not great at parties, but I'm pretty good in a room with people I know pretty good, right?
Yeah.
And then I think, oh yeah, Andrew's really funny because they know me, and my sense of humor can come out. But at a neighborhood block party with a bunch of neighbors who I barely know, I'm not like the funny guy. I'm very introverted.
Yeah.
And I think it's that same way with the stage. For me, the stage was like that friend that I had to get to know. And at first, I was very stiff and not myself. But then after a while, the stage, you go up over and over and over again. You get to know the stage and all the things that comes with that. And then you get comfortable. And the whole goal is to be yourself as much as possible.
Yeah.
And then you're going to be the funny person that you think you are in your head to them.
So how does an introvert, right? Like, because a lot of writers are introverts, some are extroverts, and there's a great deal of comfort in always being behind the curtain, right? And so, how does an introvert get into comedy? Or was that your original
you
goal?
sign up. Yeah, no, I think that I didn't get into comedy like, it's not like it is now. This was 16, 17 years ago. There wasn't as many like sort of how to, like YouTube, like we were talking about earlier, like how you can learn to do anything on YouTube.
Yeah.
There's that for comedy now, and podcasts and blogs, and it wasn't really like that back then. So I didn't think of it as a career, really. I just kind of thought it would be fun, and more about like, hey, this would be a cool thing if I was like to tell my friends one day, or like it would make me cool because I would have like, could be my personality or something,
Yeah.
And I'd always loved comedy and stand-up, so I wanted to try it. And but the way you get into it, you just sign up. And for an introvert, it's actually kind of better than you would think, because really with stand-up, you don't have to like tell anybody even. There's usually at an open mic a list that's put out on a table somewhere. You can go, you don't have to say a word to anybody. You can go over, you can put your name on the list, and then you wait, and you go up. And then when you go up on stage, again, it's like you're it's kind of like you would think, oh, an introvert would hate going up on stage and talking, but it's just completely different than like having like a one-on-one or two-on-one conversation. It's a whole different skill set. So to me, I was nervous, of course, the first few times, but it was always different, and it hasn't made me any better as far as like interacting with strangers. Now I'm still bad at like the rental car counter or whatever. I always walk away going, why did I say that? Or you're not. Anytime someone has to like find out I'm a comedian, I'm like, they're not going to think that I'm really a comedian, because I was like, I wasn't funny to them in that little period. You know what I mean? So, but I've learned to just not care and be secure enough in like what I've done in my career and stuff. But it hasn't made me better in a conversation, I don't think.
So it started out as something fun to do. And you mentioned you loved stand-up comedy. So like, what were some of your, like, what inspired you? Who inspired you?
Well, I loved, I used to watch Comedy Central's, like, the hours. So, like, Mitch Hedberg was a big one for me. I just thought he was so funny. And Dave Attell was great. And then, then once I got into stand-up, I really loved, like, Steve Martin, and Wanda Sykes was big. And I'm trying to think of some of the other ones. But Colin Quinn, once I was really kind of doing open mics, then I was like, oh my gosh, Colin Quinn is like the funniest guy ever. And so those were kind of like the big ones for me. But when I was younger, the first one I remember really loving was Attell and Hedberg, their little Comedy Central 30-minute things. That was like, those were like amazing to me.
Yeah. And were you also like a writer, or was just like you got into writing because you had to write jokes?
Yeah, my first notebook. So I read this book right after high school called The Confederacy of Dunces. Some people may know it. It's a very funny book. And in the book, the main character will do these journals. It's so he's journaling. The character is journaling within the book. And he's this insane character, like he's like this medievalist, right? So he speaks in this highfalutin language, and it has a very dim view of the current world, and is very dismissive of other people. So it's just really funny. The way he wrote was just very, very funny as in character in the journal. And so I was on my grandparents' for my graduation of high school, took me on a cruise to like, it was like kind of Northern Europe, like
cool.
Scandinavia area. Yeah, it sounds cool now, but when you're a high school kid
hanging out
going on a ship in a non-tropical area with a bunch of other 80-year-old, I was like, this isn't exactly the way. I mean, it was a beautiful present.
You were the fish out of water in that.
Totally. So I had a lot of downtime. There was a ton of downtime.
Yeah.
And I had a notebook and I didn't know what else to do. So I wrote journals as if I were the character in that book. That kind of that was like my first taste of actual writing in a notebook. And then that sort of grew into my own voice slowly. And then I started writing like ideas and jokes for this. Me and my friend Sean Stoddard, he's a funny guy I knew from high school, and he and I did a cable access show, if you can believe.
Yeah,
that's how old I am. This was like before YouTube, I think, or YouTube was there but hadn't quite. No one knew what it was or whatever. But anyway, we did cable access, so we did the Sport Report. We like sports, and so we tried to make a funny sports show. And so then I'd write jokes for that I would then eventually. I can't remember the order, but then somehow I would try those jokes on stage every once in a while, and vice versa. So
yeah, that makes sense. And I don't know if you were watching ESPN then, because I assume that would give permission, right? They tried to punch it up and be witty and have those little
yes. I think Sports Center for sure was a good influence. Like Kenny Mayne is very funny and was on, so that was like, a funny sports guy. And we just loved sports, and we loved like Saturday Night Live, like, those casts like with Chris Kattan, and I remember so we were just very into sketch comedy and stuff. And so, and Sean's very creative and funny, and so we that's what we kind of landed on. And
were you in college at this point?
Yeah. We that was like right after high school, I think, or maybe my last year of high school, and then when he was in college. It's hard to remember. I'm bad with like the dates of things.
Oh, that's okay. That's interesting. Yeah. So, but what a key element! Like you were a fish out of water on this cruise, and you were bored.
Yes, bored and no access to like any phone and forget smartphone. I mean, like not even like a telephone. You know.
Yeah.
So and no TV. Really, like, so it's and no friends, you know. So, and my grandparents were great, but they would get up like at 5 a.m, and they'd come back from breakfast, and I was still asleep. You know what I mean? So we were on different schedules,
Yeah.
And so I haven't thought about that before, but you're right. That's like the isolation of it.
Yeah.
Is kind of good for your brain sometimes.
It is. You had to entertain yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever reproduced that environment? I mean, you've had a career.
Well, yeah. I mean, I literally have since worked on cruise ships to be a comedian. And so there will be. It's similar, where your phone doesn't work and there's not much TV, and it does create sort of, I think you probably do write more when you physically can't procrastinate in one of the key ways that you're used to, know, because it's so easy to procrastinate now, because there's like, it's like just one click away to do something that takes you into entire worlds of information and entertainment, and so yeah, I mean, but what, like doing some sort of like intentional writer's retreat or something where I've never done that before, but it sounds very appealing,
Yeah, I agree. I think it sounds appealing to me as well, but gosh, look forward to that day.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard because it's not just your expectations, it's like the expectation of everyone in your life. Like it's very difficult to justify now not returning a call or a text or an email for more than 24 hours. I mean, you've got to like send out an email blast to everyone like, hey, I'm going to be off the grid for whatever.
So, people won't remember anyways, but
no. But I think you can do that in small chunks. I was reading a New York Times article, I think, about they were talking about this pandemic, and I forget the word they were using to describe it. It's not depression, and it's not, but there's like a word in between, lamenting or something. I can't remember what the word was, but they're like, that's what most people are suffering from.
Okay.
And they're saying that if you can create flow, it gets you out of that. So like if you can be doing the thing and not be thinking about the things you have to do, that it's a way to snap yourself out of it. And creating like small periods of uninterrupted time can like quadruple your productivity rather than like having your whole day to do something, but it's constantly being interrupted. So if you can just give yourself, if you can tell everybody in your life, like, hey, I need 2 hours by myself to do something, you're going to get more done than if you have 8 hours, but can be reached the whole time of those 8 hours.
Yeah. Okay.
That was there. I haven't tried it.
You're like, I don't know.
I read it like yesterday, but
I feel like I was
makes sense to me.
Feels like I was able to adapt more readily early during the pandemic, and those things. But there's a certain level of wear and tear, to this.
I'm having a harder time now. I think in the beginning, there was sort of this like, the whole ship's going down, so just throw your hands up and it's like, I'm gonna be out in my backyard, I guess, working on the grass or something, because there's like, what else are you gonna do? Everyone's in the same boat. So, but now, especially in comedy, everybody has been so creative and working hard, and then doing outdoor shows and just coming up. They're overcoming the barrier. So now it's that feeling of like falling behind is creeping in a lot more. And even though I feel like I've done a lot of the virtual shows and I've had the podcast and I have a podcast and all that, it's still difficult not to get that feeling. Whereas before, it kind of was nice knowing everybody's like in the same, sinking ship, so to speak.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting. I guess that comparison thing comes up a lot as soon as we log on and check the social media.
Oh, I know. I know.
Yeah.
Because it can cut both ways. It's inspiring to me because I go, oh my gosh, that's great. Wow, that's so creative. Oh, I can, I should be doing stuff like this, Yeah. But then on the other hand, it can be very taxing because you're like, oh, when is it ever going to be enough? Yeah, so,
well, how kind of pressing rewind here, like, you got into the comedy because it was fun and something cool to do. Like, how does this shift into a career? Like, what's the progression?
Yeah, so I mean, it's slow, It's very for me, it was very slow. It wasn't like one day I got discovered and then, they put me on the road or whatever. It was just like you're doing open mics at the club, and then you start hanging out the weekends, hoping to get like unpaid guest spots. But I will say the big shift is because at the beginning, at least for me, I had to convince, and this might be true for any artist, but you have to convince yourself to do the thing, right? I had to tell myself, okay, go back to the open mic one more time, or like, no, you should go, and you're thinking of excuses, and there's resistance, and you're like, I don't really want to go, or I'm going to bomb, but just go. So you're having this argument with yourself to go or not. And you kind of, you have to tell your brain has to tell like your body to go, right?
Yeah.
But then I don't know when it happened, but at a certain point it flips to where now I have to tell myself every once in a while, hey, you don't need to go today. You know what I mean? Like, I want to go every night, every spot, every stage, no matter what. You get like addicted. And then it's like, okay, no, you need some balance in your life, or you probably shouldn't miss your grandma's 90th birthday to go do an open mic. Don't be a psychopath. So it flips. And when it flipped, that's when I think it kind of was like, it's going to be a career now, because if I can make this, and I met some comics. That's the other thing. You meet comics that that are not famous, and you're like, oh, they have a car, they have a house. Like, it is a career. Like, you don't think, I think an audience member thinks comics are either like the poorest people in the world or the richest. Like, you're either, you know, Chris Rock or you're living in your mom's basement. And there is like a middle class. There are comics that just are kind of working comics and they make a nice living, and you may never hear of them, but they do a great job and they have their nice little following. Yeah. So I didn't know that existed, like most people, especially back then. Yeah. And so when I met those guys, I was like, well, I can do that. Like, maybe I'll never host the Tonight Show, but I can be, you know, funny enough to do that. And then if that's as good as the money is in like radio or whatever, then great.
That's so true. And like, you need to see that it's real.
Yes.
Right. And attainable. Like, I know, like, everybody's like, oh, I want to write a book, you know, but I'm never going to be Stephen King, so why bother?
Yeah, I know. There is. I
guess you need lower bars, you know, like you say I can do this, what this guy's doing.
Well, you need entry points, I think, and you need like an example of. It's so nice to have like a career path you could just mimic, you know, and it's hard to find in comedy because it's so different for everybody every time, you know. Everybody has different, but if you can, so that's why I think sometimes comics are gravitated to people from their hometown, and they're like, oh, you're from Seattle too? I'm from Seattle. Okay, so it's possible from someone from Seattle to move to New York, and you know, and or even now in my situation, I like finding comics who no longer live in New York and LA and are still doing very well, because that's like, okay, now that's a career path. Like, there's these guys like Chad Daniels and others who don't live in LA or New York, but are still giant touring great comics and doing very well. And you're like, okay, I can live in Portland and still be a viable comic.
That's interesting. And like, are you seeing that the day-to-day activities, reality of the people who do that are significantly different? Like, what's the difference in how you focus your time or energy at that point?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a huge difference necessarily, other than the other things that have come with it for moving to Portland for us. So like, our big thing, we wanted to buy a house, right? And there's no way we were doing that in LA, and we've been able to do that in Portland. So that was like a goal, and we did it, and we love it. But I will say, like, with we were talking about before about how in Los Angeles I was getting my attention pulled in all different directions. Yeah. The great thing about moving to Portland for me was those things no longer really. It was like, okay, I love stand-up. I want to be a stand-up. I'm just going to do stand-up. And I'm going to focus on stand-up, and stand-up can feed my family. I've been able to prove this. So it's like, if I put all my energy into that, maybe I can grow that big enough and not have to worry about the other stuff, you know? Yeah. And then again, I'm looking at these other comics who have done this from smaller markets, and it wasn't necessary for them to be in LA or New York or be on a sitcom or whatever. So I noticed, I think it has benefited me to move. It's made me a stronger comic, a more prolific comic, because, you know, I'm not being pulled in as many directions.
So at what point did you move to LA? Like, what point in the arc was this?
So I started in Seattle. Year or two in, I moved to Boston, actually, because a buddy of mine went to BC, who is a comic who I started with around the same time, and he was kind of liked it there. And I really think he wanted, because I had a car, he just wanted me to move there so he could borrow the car. But he got me there, and then I did comedy in Boston. I loved it, and made a lot of my really good stand-up friends today are people I met in Boston at that time. But then ended up running out of money, because talk about day jobs. Like Boston's very expensive, and I wasn't able to, crash on any of his couches or anything. So moved home back to Seattle, and then after another year or so, I moved to LA. And again, I just kind of followed comics I knew, like my friend Jeff and Brian, the guy who lived in Boston. They both went to LA and were kind of talking me into it, and so I was like, I guess that's just the next thing you do. I had no plan. I had no, like, I have my pilot, and I have my headshots, and I didn't have any of that. I was like, I guess you just go, and then you start doing comedy, and you're funny, and then they put you in stuff.
Yeah. That's not what happened?
No. You have to have like a whole, like you just, what they really want is
some of my listeners might be thinking, God, I got to move to LA or New York, I'm like,
I don't think you have to move to LA or New York, but I do think that if you move to LA or New York, you should have a plan. And you should know what people want. What they want is to make money off of you. Okay. And if you can't help them see how they're going to make money off of you, then you're wasting your time. Like,
right.
So, like if you're going to go and like, they're going to want you to take acting classes, or have already taken a lot of acting classes. They're not going to want to go, oh, you're a funny stand-up. I'm going to just put you on the road. Yeah. They make no money off of that. You know what I mean? So,
So did you do those things? Did you?
No, I didn't. No, I had a little bit of like, so I had like some representation and got a few writing gigs, and I did Conan, and I had some success.
You're kind of you're kind of breezing over this, like Okay. So you get down there.
Yes.
Conan gig falls in your lap.
No.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
So how do you like?
Nothing ever fell in my lap.
Because I'm thinking about this, like, you're doing this outdoor work, sodding, and you don't know anything about sodding, but you're the expert on sodding, right? Like, is there a parallel to this, to getting into writing for late night TV?
Yeah, well, as far as the parallel would be, just lie. And say you can do stuff. Because no one knows anything,
Yeah.
Like, and that's it for every level of art. I think, like, comics, specifically for comedy, and then you can take it wherever you want, but specifically for comedy, comics are always like, oh, I don't know if I have this much time, or I don't know if I have, it's a clean show, I don't know if, just say you can do it, and you'll rise to the occasion, or you won't. And then and then they'll be mad at you. But so what? At least you try it. You know what I mean? I'm a big believer in just do it, and you'll find a way, But, so when I moved down there, it was very difficult doing open mics. Open mic scene down there is very tough. There was no easy passes or anything, but I did get, a few. I'm trying to think of like how things even. I would do festivals. So actually, the way I got my first manager was doing a festival in Asheville, North Carolina. It was not anything to do with LA. It's funny. The guy lived in LA. I lived in LA. But it takes going to these festivals for them to pay attention.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's how I got my first manager. And then I remember after that happened, I was like, well, I'm on easy street now. Because I was like, oh, yeah. He was like, oh, I book colleges. I was like, great. Colleges pay great. Put me on the road. I'll do a bunch of colleges. See it. And of course, no, that's not how it works. At any level I've ever gotten to with representation, you still have to hustle just as hard as when you didn't have it.
Yeah.
And the key is with these managers and agents, like, that maybe they can get you into different competitions, but you still have to work your ass off to get those jobs. And that's what I didn't understand that either. I thought when I got a manager, it was like, they'll just book me on stuff and I don't have to worry anymore. Yeah. But no, of course they're thinking, hey, that was funny. You're talented. Now you got to do all this stuff, But I was talking about this with my wife the other day. It's like, it's two things. One, I was a little arrogant. I didn't think I had to take acting classes and stuff.
Yeah.
And then two, it's expensive. Everyone's like, yeah, take these classes, get these headshots, do this, do that, take UCB classes, go to the groundlings, go. Yeah. And it's like all that stuff costs like thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And I don't understand. I mean, so there really is.
You don't see the link to how you were going to do it.
No, and I was and the thing is stand up is free. That's what I love about stand up. It's open to all. And it's, and sometimes there's some prejudices from the people running whatever room or whatever, and I'm not diminishing that, but at least it's free, and you can sign up, and they're not going to charge you. Some people do stand-up classes, and, some of those are good, some of those aren't, but what I'm saying is there's no barrier to entry financially to get into stand-up, usually. And it's just with acting and all this other stuff, and especially now, they're like, oh, for writing, like my wife is a screenwriter, people will tell you to produce stuff. They'll be like, yeah, to really get in, you should make it.
On your own
like, oh, yeah.
On your own time. Yes.
I'll just come up with like $300,000 or something and we'll, make this. It's like, and I get so they money is a big part of it that nobody likes to talk about. But if you're not like, have some funding down there, it can be difficult.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I was doing all right, though. I was kind of working the road. Most of the stuff I booked myself. And then when I got a college agent who was different than that manager, that changed things for me quite a bit because he really did book me on colleges. And that was real money, money I was not used to. Yeah. And then, and that was kind of from being down in LA, but not really. Like my college agent is out of North Carolina, so... I'm never sure how much the perception of living somewhere changes things or not. But then, and then a few years of doing that, and then the way I got Conan, though, I kind of broke up with my manager at the time because I was like, this isn't going the way I thought it was. And, a lot of it's my fault because when I said earlier, I was like, when I got, hooked up with you, I kind of took my foot off the gas, and what I should have done the opposite, and so I think I'm just going to try and do it my own way for a while, and then who knows, but I'm just going to go it myself, right? And but then I was sending out my tape, I was working hard at stand up, and then I wanted to do Conan, so my buddy Brant Tobler and I, he was my roommate too, and we would walk Runyon Canyon every day, and we were like, man, we just need someone. We don't even need a manager to like take, percentage off our road gigs and stuff. What we just need is like a guy who can send stuff on our behalf, so we don't look like amateurs. Yeah. So we had this buddy Ryan, my buddy Ryan, and he's like this New York dude, and he worked in TV production, or he does, and he's a real slick talker, like the opposite of me at a party. Like he kills it. Like everybody's gonna remember him, all this stuff. And I was like, all right, you're going to be our manager. So he made a website. His name's Ryan Kreppen, and he calls it K-Reppin. And
Nice.
He sent the email to the Conan booker and got me on. And then that tape, but he did do like managerial things. Like he was like, no, we're going to get a tape. We're going to get my boy Willie. He's got a great camera. We're going to make it look really good. Yeah. And that's what got me on Conan. And then to this day, he's like good friends with the Conan booker. Like he was like at his wedding and stuff. So
right on. Well, that worked out.
Yeah. So
having a team. So you didn't do it yourself, lone wolf style.
No.
Okay.
Ryan really helped me.
You are my 87th guest to confess that you did not do it all yourself. Out of 87,
of course,
which is an impressive track rerecord. I'm still waiting.
Someone's gonna have the balls.
I thought you were gonna be the unicorn.
No, not at all. And I always say, like, in the comedy world, especially, like most of the stuff you get is with the help of other comics. Like, so when you go to a festival and you think, and this might be true for writers or anybody, but you think like, oh, there's going to be publishers there's going to be industry. I've got to really make connections with them. But those people change all the time. Yeah. Whoever was working at Comedy Central this week was not there a year ago and was not there 2 years ago. So to keep track of them, But comics stay in it. So like, and they know who to talk to, and they just got this thing and they can get you that gig or whatever.
Yeah.
So those are the most valuable relationships are with your peers, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you're not doing it yourself, is my point.
Yeah. Looking out for each other. But so you're not, at what point, if ever, did you feel like your peers were your competition?
Oh, well, I mean, you tell yourself they're not, because you try to think it through logically, and you go, they're not taking my spot. You know, they got that thing because that was their thing, or that was creative for them, or whatever. They just, that wasn't something you were up for and missed out on. But it's a combination of that always, that you kind of think competitively. I'd say there's probably like 3 or 4 comics who I'm like super close with, who I would never, there would never be even a twinge of like, God damn, that would be great if that was me. You know what I mean? There's not even a hint of that. There's probably like a few, and I have to be really, but almost everybody else, if it's something big, I go, man, why did I not get, you know what I mean? There is that feeling, and then you kind of just have to talk yourself off that ledge and go, no, you know, that wasn't going to be, they're not taking your spot. They're just doing their thing, and you got to do your thing, you know?
Yeah. You ever in the past go, oh, that was a really cool gig. How do I get that gig?
Oh, every time.
Yeah.
Every time. Yeah. And it can be stuff you don't even want.
Yeah.
It can be things like, I don't even want to do that, you know, or I wouldn't even say yes to that, but you're still mad that it wasn't like something
interesting.
You know.
Was there a point where you developed that filter, like what you would say yes and no to?
Oh man, that's the hardest thing in comedy, is saying no, because they got you by the balls because you want to do it. You know, you want to do, that's what I was talking about. But like, when you love it like this, it's like you want to do every show. And so when they offer you bad money, or they offer you, like, you think you're a headliner, but they want you to feature, and you have to say no, it's so hard because you want to do it, because you're like, that'd be a fun weekend. I'd feature and do 15, 20 minutes or whatever, and it's a cakewalk, and it'd be a fun crowd, and I could hang out with the headliner. It'd be a fun weekend. But you just know that if you say yes to that they'll never bump you up or whatever.
Yeah,
and so once you kind of have a toehold in a certain level, you kind of have to stay there, because it's weird. That's part of the weird game of it. But anyway, and now I find, being married and have a kid, because I talked to this comic, Kira Saltanovich, about this one time, and she's a very, very funny comic, and she's got kids, and she's like, the kid thing really helped me clarify the money part. Like, it's got to be worth it now to leave the house. I'm not just gonna go for nothing, you know. And I'm once things kind of really pick back up and this pandemic ends, I'm curious to see how having a kid for me changes my calculus on some of that.
Yeah. I guess there's only one way to find out.
Yeah. No, that's so true. And, you know, how long can you hold out? So you can say, hey, I don't leave the house for less than, you know, X. But then how long does it take for you not to be offered X before you start, okay, I'll take Y?
Yeah. Well, I guess I guess it's different. Like, when you're full thrust and you're booked out, and maybe there were certain gigs that you need to start weeding out to make room, right?
Yeah.
That's one thing. But coming back in when you're not booked up, I imagine, is a different mindset shift to hold that boundary.
Yes. And I think this is a good test right now of my standards or whatever, because, you know, I am desperate to do, you know, I got my first shot a few days ago. When I get that second shot, I am really excited to get back on the road and get back to doing live shows. And it'll be a good test for me to what I say yes and no to.
Well, one of the things you list on your bio, and I'll admit, I listened to your other podcast a bit, the one the one kind of insider podcast about comedy.
Oh, the stand-up one, yeah.
Yeah, and talk about writing straight and not straight, right? Or what? I don't know if I got the terminology right, but you mentioned that you can perform for a variety of audiences, and in comedy that that in some ways is a little different than even like I did music and was a songwriter, right? And like with comedy, people are the joke, right? So like, how do you approach writing for different audiences and that like whole thing?
Yeah, so I try not to write for different audiences necessarily. So what I try to do is, not filter ideas.
Okay.
And this is something this is something we talked about on there. But I try to go, any idea to me that's funny, I'm gonna write.
Yeah.
And then, if there's like, I just try not to curse a lot because that's just like a financial decision. Because as weird as the world has gotten, and it's funny, is you think like, you watch TV now, you can say anything, but in a weird way, there's still a lot more money in being able to do a clean show. And when you're not famous, if you're famous, I'll forget it. You just say whatever you want.
Yeah.
But so that's just like a financial choice. But the idea itself, I try never to filter. And then, so that I'm going to end up with some jokes that like I can't tell at like certain events or corporate functions or whatever. Yeah. And then
you can just kind of tag those, or do you have like some way of like organizing your stuff so that you can easily find what's
I wish I was a little more organized, to be honest with you, but I try to write set lists in my notebook, and then I just kind of consult the last few weeks of set lists, and kind of that's my running hour, so to speak. And then if you look at that and they're like, oh, that bit's not going to work here or whatever, then you can swap out for older stuff or whatever. Yeah. But I try to write a set list for every show.
At any point were you ever like, gosh, this would be my worst nightmare? Like, is there something that like you were afraid would happen?
That happened?
Yeah, well, sure. Sounds like you're like, I got a story there. My worst nightmare happened. No,
I was just trying to clarify.
No, I was just trying to get to like, at some point, were you worried about the content of your jokes or offending people, and like what was going to happen at some point?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not one of those guys who's like, I definitely don't want to offend anybody. Yeah. I definitely don't want anyone to not have a good time. I want everyone to have fun and laugh and think it's fun, funny show. But I think when I started, I was a little more like, it's comedy. You can say whatever you want. You should think whatever you want, and it's free speech and all that. And I still believe that, but I also think like, for me, my own I just want to be able to defend it if I had to. So like, if I did my set and it was a joke that someone was upset about, I know I've already had the conversation. I already know how I would defend it. I don't want to just defend it on the grounds of, hey, I'm a comedian, I can say whatever I want. I want to actually defend the idea of the joke. And then if you still think it's offensive, then I don't know, then whatever, then we can have the argument. But
right. But as then you're solid about your own morals or ethics. Or
as long as I've run it through what I think, and I'm a pretty educated guy, and I try to keep up with the news and everything. So it's like, as long as I can defend it, reasonably, and it's funny, then I can be convinced that I'm wrong. I'm also open-minded to that, but if I'm not convinced, then I'll do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So you scrubbing COVID jokes from your set list?
Yeah. No, I do a lot of COVID jokes right now, but I mean, it is funny. Like, I want to record an album. I'm aiming for October because I was kind of sitting on a bunch of stuff before everything kind of fell apart. And like, who knows what's still going to be like, things change so quick. I don't know if people be sick of it, but no, I I do a little bit of COVID stuff. Not as much. I've been doing these virtual shows. It used to be like a ton of COVID stuff. I've cut a lot of it out because life has changed too. A lot of it was like waiting in line at the grocery store and stuff like that. And then like that's not really the reality for most people anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, you have to kind of update it as we go. I'm sure a lot of it will not make it to October, but
yeah. Is part of the power of stuff like that making other people's experiences feel seen, like acknowledging people's reality?
Yeah,
power in that.
I think like when you hit something, people go, and they light up even before the punchline. That's when you know you're like in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like when you bring up, I'm trying to think of a good example, but I do this bit about like free little libraries,
Mm-hmm.
And when they really get it and they've seen a bunch of those and they go, oh my God, I know, you know what I mean? Then it's like, you're like, oh, this is going to kill, because you're right. You're kind of validating their experience or whatever. And there's entire careers of guys who've been made off of being a very specific archetype. And there being enough of those people like that. And then they can say what it really... They can say whatever they want as long as it gets funneled through that experience.
Sure,
people love it.
The top comedy job I can think of, an archetype, there would be President of the United States.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean that's kind of true, right? Like it didn't matter what he said.
Pretty much about 99%.
Yeah,
true.
It doesn't matter what, especially the previous president. It didn't matter what he said.
Yeah.
It was more about the, like you said,
emotional resonance. There's emotional resonance to what you're doing.
He tapped into that for sure.
Well, for you, is there like a common emotional resonance, or like a theme, some central, what's central to Andrew Sleighter?
Man, that's a tough question. I really, there's been a few times I've really try to sit down and think about that and literally write it out, because I think it would help me career-wise to have something like that. But
sometimes it's hard to do that for yourself.
It's
right?
very hard,
Yeah.
I just think like, it's a tough question. I really would have to think about that more, because I don't have a good answer for you.
Maybe it's a good reason to do that comedy album. Like, so as an author, right, like you start out, you don't know who's going to like your books. And then you put stuff out, you get reviews, you have fans, and they tell you word for word. And it's like, ooh, yeah, that's it. Like, that's my copy.
Yeah. Every once in a while I'll read, you'll see a review of either yourself or something else. And you're like, oh, they got it. Like my wife gets coverage of her scripts, and then she'll go, oh, they get it. That's exactly what I was going, what I mean? And so I want to use that as like a quote for the log line or whatever. But
well, what does it mean? What does it mean to make a comedy album for you? Is that like a live performance? Is it like a recorded, go in a booth kind of thing? Or?
No, it's a live performance, because you definitely want the audience in there and to get a real show. I want it to feel like when you're listening to it, either in your car or on your phone or whatever, I want it to feel like you were at the show, So there could be like weird things that happen just like at any live show, and that I try to keep that as much as possible. And then for comics, it's a good way. It's one of the few ways to make like a passive income, and if you can get played on Sirius Radio and Spotify. Not Spotify and Pandora, very small parts of it, but the XM radio is pretty good, and selling the album and stuff. It's a way to get your stuff out there to people who've never seen you before. So and you know what it really is? It's like a way to finish because you have no other way to really mark like these achievements, like, because you come up with an hour of jokes, you do that for a while, you don't want to just do that hour of jokes for the rest of your life, so you want to keep creating. So it's like a way to retire stuff, and you go, okay, that joke was from that album, And it's like a way to organize it. And then you're like, this is the new hour. And then these jokes will be on this. Because not everybody gets like an HBO special. So there's no way to categorize it otherwise. And then once I've done this album and it's out and people can get it, then I can go, oh, those jokes were on that album. Time to start the new. It's just a way to like mark your progress. Kind of.
Well, that's got to feel satisfying if you can.
Yeah, and when you come up with a few of them, then you can go, wow, I've really, got kind of a collection here. And it's a way to, because otherwise, you write these jokes, you do these jokes, they just go off into the ether, and there's no record of it. I don't have, I'm not one of these comics who keeps every, note card and book and put them on a computer drive or something. I don't know where those jokes are, as far as written wise.
Yeah.
And so it's really the only record of them.
That makes sense. So how many do you have?
Right. I have 2 now that you could get on the whatever you listen on. And then
on all the things.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah. I don't even know how people listen to stuff anymore. And then this one will be the 3rd.
Cool. And are those things like you have a physical product up when you go on tour? Or
I used to, and then the technological innovation was these digital download cards.
Yeah.
And then you'd sell the. Yeah, because nobody would really.
Nobody redeems them.
I felt bad selling them, because I was like, and also like, they want to support. They like the show.
Yeah.
They want to buy something.
Yeah.
So great. But I would feel bad. I'm like, this isn't, and no one has CD players. So I this next one, I'll just be like, go find it online. And here's a, I don't know what to tell you. I'd rather sell like T-shirts or even a DVD. I've sold DVDs before. Even that feels like, well, here's a thing that if they might have a DVD player somewhere, like they could use. But I don't sell physical copies of the album. I don't think I probably will.
So you think those are more discovery vehicles at this point for you, like for people to find you?
Both. I think I think most people who know me would download the album, but they would use probably like their Apple Music or whatever. Yeah,
streaming service kind of thing.
And then the people who you're trying to reach, who you might get new fans, are going to find it via Spotify playlists or listening on XM radio or whatever.
So
is the idea.
If you looked at the landscape of online things, right, there's social media, there's like Instagrams, there's Twitter, there's YouTube, and then there's these streaming services. Like, if you were to pick your top 2 that are most important to your career, what would those be?
That's a great question. I think the thing probably Instagram and I guess Twitter. But, it's funny. I feel like Twitter is more of a way for me to interact with, keep in touch with, resonate with my peers. And Instagram, Facebook is more fan type of, or at least people consuming your product more, I don't think I get a lot of people who like, oh, I know you from Twitter or something, But I think it's important to me because it makes me feel connected to like other comics.
Yeah. So why is Instagram more important to you than, say, the Sirius or YouTube?
Oh, well, okay, let me back up. Sirius is the most important because it pays.
Yes.
And I don't think people understand I almost don't like talking about it because it's so out of whack with the other distributors that you don't want them to you don't want it to get back to them. You don't want them to know how much more they pay.
I'm guessing
and they know, but I mean, it's just funny to me. It's like my friend Joe Zimmerman, he tweeted that. He was like, who negotiate? Because he broke it down, like what you get per play by Spotify.
I'm guessing we have like Howard Stern and the big names who jumped on the series early to thank for those rates.
But I will say, so that that is the most important, because it's a significant amount of money every month that I don't get any money from Instagram or Twitter or anything.
You know, the reason why I asked what I was getting at really is, you know, the 80-20 rule. And like, we do all this stuff, and most of the time it feels like we're just kind of guessing at what the most effective levers are. And so we're doing everything, right? And so I'm guessing at this point, 15 years in, and it's always changing, but you have a pretty good sense of like, okay, if I need to generate income or I need to do this thing, like there are these levers that I can pull, right?
Yeah. So like the album is not just about like, okay, let me, you know, put my art out there and hopefully it lands. No, it's like, it's a calculated thing. Like beyond everything else I said, it's like, it's a way to make money, generate income. And you know, it gets back to the clean thing, because there's like serious channels that won't play certain content or whatever. So the more clean stuff you have, the more chance you have to make money on there as well. So no, it's like, you're thinking about making money with a comedy album 100%.
Yeah.
And I've only recently even really tried to focus more on social media, because I see how I finally have, you know, understand how important it is to comedian success. But
so tell me why is it important?
Well,
some people find it a distraction, right? Like,
yeah, it's a total distraction.
Yeah.
The only way to like really beat it, I think, would be like, I'm gonna create and log off. I'm gonna provide content and then not consume. Right? It's a very difficult thing to do, though. And both things are difficult. It's difficult to create content. It's difficult not to consume it.
Yeah.
And so like, but it's so important for comedians, because now more than ever, comedy clubs have a business model where the performer drives all the ticket sales.
Yeah.
Like, they invest very little on their own, because why would they? They don't need to put people on the radio and buy magazine advertisements or whatever they used to do, you know? All they have to do is book someone with a really good following, and they're going to do all the promotion, and then they're going to get everybody out to see them. They're going to sell a bunch of tickets. So me coming to a comedy club and just doing a really good job for their regulars isn't cutting it.
That makes sense.
You know, anymore, especially post-pandemic. I mean, when everyone's hurting, they're going to be going for the absolute guaranteed ticket sales. So how am I going to get people to come see me? I mean, there's really one way now. It's like creating a social media following, whether it's with the podcast or the, you know, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter stuff, or TikTok or whatever, you know, whatever it is. It's like email lists. I'm learning more about email lists. I mean, all this stuff, it's really important, and it's stuff I did not take seriously for a long time, to my own detriment. But I'm learning, you know, I'm a slow learner, but I'm going to learn it. I'm not, like I said, I'm being open-minded, and I think it'll pay off in the long run.
Cool. Of those platforms, like, can you tell which ones get the most attention or have the most eyes on them for you?
Yeah, I find that, well, you know what's weird is this, like, comedians, I think, have just kind of discovered the TikTok, you know?
Yeah.
But just putting a stand-up clip on TikTok gets so much more attention than anywhere else. And I don't know if it's because TikTok's newer and they want there to be, like, their algorithms more generous or something. Yeah. And so they want you to get hooked or whatever. But whatever it is, it does seem to be like more is happening there. Yeah. But I've tried to focus on, like, trying to get people to my YouTube page recently. So I'm trying to do, like, original stuff just for YouTube that isn't even stand-up. It's just, like, kind of jokes directly to...
Yeah.
And it's just really hard. It's hard to build people on there, get attention on there. Yeah. And so I don't know. I'm not going to quit, because comics with big YouTube channels have it really good, because then they can kind of release their stuff on there, and it's totally insular sort of thing, right? Like, you get the revenue, and then you get to own the rights to everything. And So it's definitely the way to go if you can build the audience, but it's hard. It's hard. It's very difficult.
Yeah, and people, it's hard to switch people from one platform to another, like drive traffic between platforms. They're not really designed to do that. Yeah.
And the way you shoot video or create video, it's not designed to go jump from one to the other. Like you almost have to create stuff specific for each platform, it seems like, for it to do well. But who knows? It's like you said, it's like I'm trying to keep an open mind to it because I understand how important it is. But in like a perfect world, I just get my little notebook, write my little jokes, go on stage, make a couple bucks, go home, feel really good about myself. I mean, that would be a great life, but it's just, that's not the way the world is, I don't think.
Well, second to last question then, is you've been doing this a long time. So what is it about this stand-up comedy that drives you today? Like, what's your why today for doing it?
I think first of all, I love like it sounds so stupid and cliche, but I really do love laughing. I love when something is really funny. Mm-hmm. And so I just like being in that laboratory of trying to make that. Yeah. And then I think, there is sort of a gigantic rush adrenaline-wise of being on stage and getting immediate gratification from saying something clever and being able to command that is it affects your mood when you can't do it. Like I said, this pandemic, thank God for these virtual shows. It really has saved me because it's like it definitely changes my whole sort of attitude for a day if I can't perform. So you get used to it.
Well, and how cool to have the instant gratification process, right? Like,
I feel bad for writers sometimes, like my wife, it's like she spends months and months and months, and then you send it off to something and you get these notes, and then it's like, if the notes aren't great, then it's like, you can't just go up that next night and get good notes. You got to there's all this time that goes by, and so to be able to go on stage and just go bing, 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 bing. Like that worked, that didn't work, that worked. I mean, it's the best.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, for people who want to know more about you, how can they find you?
My website is, if you just go to andrewcomedy.com.
andrewcomedy.com. Right.
Yeah, or andrewsleighter.com. But Sleighter can be difficult for people to spell. It's spelled Sleighter. So
it's German. Come on.
I know, but it's people have problems, and so so Andrew Comedy takes you to the same place, and
it's a redirect then.
Yeah, and then I have, like you mentioned, my podcast is called The Cavalry, and I do it with my buddy Johnny Beaner. It's every Monday, and then otherwise online, it's everywhere. It's just at Andrew Sleighter.
Right on, at Andrew Sleighter.
Yeah,
but then they have to spell it.
So there's no Andrew Comedy on there. So you think sleigh, like you're writing on a sleigh. Yeah. And then tur. I don't have anything for that.
That's great.
Part.
Yeah. There's a visual.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Andrew Sleighter, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. This was fun. I appreciate it, chatting with you.
I hope you've enjoyed today's episode of The Fearless Storyteller. As a reminder, any and all links can be found in the show notes. And if you're enjoying this podcast, will you please consider leaving a review? By doing so, you'll be helping new listeners discover the Fearless Storyteller podcast.